The coffee was cold again. Victoria didn't even need to taste it to know. She could tell by the way her assistant, Marcus Webb, set it down on her desk with that apologetic little dip of his head, as if he were placing an offering before an angry goddess. And perhaps that's exactly what he was doing, because Victoria Chen was furious. "Is this some kind of joke?" she said, not bothering to look up from her computer screen. Her fingers continued their staccato rhythm across the keyboard, each keystroke a tiny act of aggression. "I explicitly told you I wanted my coffee at exactly 170 degrees. Do you know what temperature this is, Marcus?" Marcus stood there in his ill-fitting suit that had probably come from some discount store, clutching his worn leather portfolio against his chest like a shield. He was 26, gangly, with dark hair that always looked slightly disheveled no matter how much gel he used, and glasses that constantly slid down his nose. Everything about him screamed mediocrity, and Victoria couldn't stand mediocrity. "I apologize, Ms. Chen. The line at the coffee shop was longer than expected, and I don't pay you to make excuses," Victoria interrupted, finally looking up at him with those sharp, calculating eyes that had made grown men squirm in boardroom negotiations. "I pay you to anticipate problems and solve them before they become my problems. If you can't handle something as simple as maintaining coffee temperature, how can I trust you with anything of actual importance?" She watched as his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. There it was, that little flash of something in his eyes, quickly suppressed. Good. At least he had some spine, even if he chose to hide it under all that deference and accommodation. Marcus had been her assistant for 6 months now, and in that time, Victoria had perfected the art of finding fault with everything he did. His reports were always too detailed or not detailed enough. His scheduling was too rigid or too flexible. His initiative was either overstepping or insufficient. The truth was, no matter what Marcus did, it would never be enough, because Victoria Chen didn't believe in enough. She believed in perfection, in dominance, in the constant pressure that separated the weak from the strong. "I'll get you a fresh one," Marcus said quietly, reaching for the offending cup. "Don't bother. I have the Hartman meeting in 10 minutes. Victoria stood, smoothing down her pristine Armani suit. "Just make sure the conference room is set up properly. And Marcus, if those quarterly reports aren't on my desk by 5 o'clock, we're going to have a very different conversation about your future here." She swept past him, her Louboutin heels clicking authoritatively against the marble floor, leaving behind a faint trail of her expensive perfume. She didn't see the way Marcus's hands clenched briefly around his portfolio, or the way he closed his eyes and took a slow, steadying breath before following her out. The Hartman meeting was a disaster, though Victoria would never admit it out loud. Richard Hartman, CEO of Hartman Technologies, had been considering a merger that would have elevated Sterling Industries into the top tier of tech manufacturing. But Victoria's aggressive negotiation tactics, her refusal to show any flexibility on terms, and her barely concealed contempt for what she considered Hartman's outdated business model, had turned the room ice cold within the first 20 minutes. "Ms. Chen," Hartman had said, his southern drawl becoming more pronounced as his patience wore thin, "I came here today hoping to find a partner, not a dictator. Sterling Industries may have impressive numbers, but numbers aren't everything in business. Sometimes, it's about people, it's about respect and collaboration." Victoria had smiled that sharp, cutting smile of hers. "Mr. Hartman, with all due respect, this is business, not a social club. The numbers speak for themselves, and they say that your company needs us far more than we need you. I'm offering you terms that are more than generous given your current market position." Hartman had stood then, buttoning his jacket with deliberate slowness. "You know what I see when I look at you, Ms. Chen. I see someone who's confused fear with strength. Someone who thinks that tearing others down somehow builds them up. Good luck with that approach. In my experience, it's a lonely way to the top, and an even lonelier way down." He'd walked out, taking his offer and his dignity with him, leaving Victoria alone in the conference room surrounded by the carefully prepared presentations that Marcus had spent all night putting together. She'd sat there for exactly 30 seconds, letting the anger and something else, something that felt uncomfortably like shame, wash over her. Then she'd stood, gathered her materials, and marched straight to Marcus's desk. "The Hartman deal fell through," she'd announced, as if it were his fault somehow. I need you to compile a list of alternative merger candidates by tomorrow morning. And this time, try to find companies that actually understand the value of what we're offering. Marcus had looked up at her from his desk, where he'd been eating what appeared to be a sad sandwich from a plastic container, probably his lunch at 3 in the afternoon because he'd been too busy running her errands to eat at a normal time. Yes, Ms. Chen, he'd said simply. I'll have it ready by 8 a.m. And he would, Victoria knew. Marcus always delivered, no matter how impossible the task or how tight the deadline. It was one of the few things she could count on, though she'd never tell him that. Praise was a currency Victoria rarely spent, believing it only made people complacent. The rest of the day passed in its usual flurry of phone calls, emails, and meetings. Victoria thrived in the chaos, moving from one crisis to the next with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a warrior. She didn't notice when Marcus stayed late again, didn't acknowledge the way he quietly handled a vendor dispute that could have derailed their entire production schedule, didn't see him rubbing his tired eyes as he reviewed contracts she'd asked for at the last minute. By the time Victoria left the office at 9 p.m., Marcus was still there, his desk lamp the only light on the floor besides her own office. She paused for just a moment, something strange and unfamiliar tugging at her chest, but she pushed it away and walked to the elevator without a word. What Victoria didn't know was that while she slept in her penthouse apartment, alone as always, Marcus sat in his modest studio, not working on the merger candidates she demanded, but on his laptop speaking in rapid Mandarin to someone on a video call. And if she'd been able to understand the conversation, she would have heard him say, "No, Dad, I'm not ready to tell her yet. I need to see this through. I need to understand why she is the way she is. There's something broken here, and I think maybe I can help fix it." The next morning started with another cold coffee and another silent disappointment in Victoria's eyes. But this time, as Marcus set the cup down, he also placed a folder beside it. "The alternative merger candidates you requested," he said. "I've identified 5 companies that align with our strategic goals and seem more amenable to collaborative partnerships. I've also included preliminary research on their CEOs and corporate cultures, since that seemed to be a factor in yesterday's discussion." Victoria opened the folder, and despite herself, felt a flicker of something like respect. The research was thorough, insightful, and demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that went far beyond what she expected from an assistant. Each candidate was analyzed not just financially, but culturally, with notes on leadership styles and potential compatibility with Sterling's approach. "This is adequate," she said, which from Victoria Chen was practically a standing ovation. Then, because she couldn't let the moment breathe, she added, "Though I notice you included Meridian Corp. They're direct competitors in the Asian market. That's a potential conflict of interest." "Actually," Marcus said, and there was something different in his voice now, something that made Victoria look up, "Meridian isn't a direct competitor. They focus on commercial applications while we dominate consumer markets. A merger would actually eliminate overlap while expanding both companies' reach. It's synergistic, not conflictual." Victoria stared at him. In 6 months, Marcus had never challenged her assessments. He'd taken her criticisms, her corrections, her condescension with nothing but quiet acceptance. This small act of standing his ground, of contradicting her with facts and logic, was so unexpected that for a moment she didn't know how to respond. "I'll review it," she finally said, her tone clipped. "That's all, Marcus." But as he turned to leave, she found herself saying, "Marcus." He paused, looking back at her with those steady brown eyes that seemed to see far more than she was comfortable with. "Where did you go to school?" It was a question she'd never bothered to ask, never cared enough to wonder about. She knew nothing about Marcus Webb except that he was punctual, competent enough, and frustratingly difficult to rattle no matter how much pressure she applied. Something flickered across his face, an emotion too quick to catch. "Stanford," he said. "Business school. Graduated top of my class." Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. Stanford. Top of his class. And here he was, fetching her coffee and absorbing her abuse without complaint. It didn't make sense. Someone with those credentials could work anywhere, do anything. Why was he here, enduring her daily cruelty? "I see," she said, though she didn't see at all. "That's all." This time when he left, Victoria sat back in her chair and did something she almost never did. She thought about someone other than herself. Who was Marcus Webb? What was his story? And more disturbingly, why did she suddenly care? The answer came 3 days later, delivered not by Marcus, but by her own hubris. Victoria had decided to pursue the Meridian Corp merger, though she'd never admit it was Marcus's idea. She'd scheduled a dinner meeting with James Morrison, Meridian's CEO, at Lumiere, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. It was a power play, a demonstration of Sterling Industries' prestige and her own importance. She'd instructed Marcus to make the reservation weeks in advance, to ensure they got the private dining room. But when Victoria arrived that evening, dressed in a stunning black dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, the maitre d' looked at her with genuine confusion. "I'm sorry, Ms. Chen, but we don't have a reservation under your name or Sterling Industries. The private dining room has been booked for months." Victoria felt the blood drain from her face, then rush back in a wave of humiliation and fury. Around her, other diners were beginning to notice the commotion, whispering behind their hands, their eyes gleaming with the schadenfreude of watching the mighty stumble. "That's impossible," she hissed, keeping her voice low despite the rage building inside her. "My assistant made this reservation." "Check again." The maitre d' did, with the exaggerated patience of someone who already knew the answer. "I'm very sorry, but there's nothing here. We're completely booked tonight. Perhaps if you'd like to wait at the bar, we might be able to accommodate you in 2 or 3 hours. Victoria wanted to scream. James Morrison would arrive any moment, and she'd have to tell him that she couldn't even manage a simple dinner reservation. After all her posturing about Sterling Industries' superiority, she was about to be exposed as incompetent in the most public way possible. "There must be some mistake," said a voice behind her, and Victoria turned to see Marcus approaching, except he looked different. He was wearing an impeccably tailored suit that fit him perfectly, his hair was styled, his glasses were gone, replaced, she realized, by contact lenses, and he moved with a confidence she'd never seen in him before. "The reservation is under Webb, not Chen. Private dining room, 8 o'clock. The maitre d's entire demeanor changed. His eyes widened, and he actually bowed slightly. "Mr. Webb, of course, sir. My apologies. Please, right this way. And may I say, it's wonderful to see you again." Victoria stood frozen, watching this transformation unfold. Marcus turned to her, and for the first time since he'd started working for her, he met her eyes as an equal. "Shall we?" he said, offering his arm. In a daze, Victoria took it, and allowed herself to be led through the restaurant to the private dining room where James Morrison was already waiting. The entire evening passed in a blur. Marcus, her assistant, her coffee fetching, report filing, perpetually apologetic assistant, conducted himself with the ease and sophistication of someone born to this world. He knew the wine list by heart, greeted the chef by name, and engaged Morrison in a discussion about market trends and cultural dynamics that revealed a depth of knowledge and insight that left Victoria silent. And Morrison responded to him not with the wariness he'd shown Victoria, but with genuine respect and warmth. By the end of the evening, they'd outlined a merger framework that satisfied both parties, with Marcus facilitating the discussion so smoothly that Victoria had hardly needed to speak at all. When Morrison left, shaking both their hands with enthusiasm and promising to have his lawyers draw up preliminary agreements, Victoria remained seated, staring at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus sat back down across from her, and in his eyes was something that might have been sadness or might have been compassion. "I think you know, Victoria. Or at least, you could have known if you'd ever bothered to ask." "Marcus Webb," Victoria said slowly, her mind racing through connections, possibilities. Then it hit her with the force of a physical blow. Not Marcus Webb, Marcus Webb Lee. She'd read about the Webb Lee family in Forbes, in the Wall Street Journal, in countless business publications. They were one of the wealthiest families in Asia, with holdings in technology, real estate, manufacturing, and entertainment. Alexander Webb Lee, the patriarch, was worth an estimated $40 billion. And his son, his only son, was known for his reluctance to trade on the family name, for his desire to prove himself on his own merits. "You've been playing me," Victoria said, anger rising to cover the embarrassment, the shame, the horrifying realization of how she'd treated him for 6 months. "This whole time, you've been slumming it as my assistant while laughing at me behind my back." "No," Marcus said firmly. "I've never laughed at you, Victoria. I've pitied you, worried about you, tried to understand you, but I've never laughed." "Pitied me?" Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I don't need your pity. I don't need anything from you. You're fired. Get out." But Marcus didn't move. He just looked at her with those steady, two knowing eyes and said, "Sit down, Victoria. We're going to have a conversation, and for once, you're going to listen instead of talk." And perhaps it was the shock, or the exhaustion, or the weight of 6 months of her own cruelty crashing down on her, but Victoria Chen, who never took orders from anyone, sat down.